He had built an empire, a house on the lake, a private plane on standby, and 2 children who believed their father was one of the most successful men in the world. But on the morning Damian Blackwood walked into family court, there was something he wanted more than his fortune. He wanted his wife's children, and he believed the outcome was already decided. What Damian did not know was that the woman he had spent months trying to discredit had stopped trying to convince anyone of anything. Amelia Blackwood had started keeping records instead. She had saved messages, tracked dates, noted phone calls, hotel reservations, and financial transfers. She had begun paying attention to every inconsistency in the story her husband had built around her. On the morning Damian expected the judge to finalize his version of events, Amelia walked into the courtroom carrying a single folder. Damian looked at her, then at the folder in her hands, and for the first time since this began, he looked uncertain. Amelia was not there to tell the judge that her husband had lied. She was there to show it. The folder held evidence of how the story had been constructed, who had helped build it, where certain funds had gone, and why he had worked so hard to keep her away from their children. The most significant piece of evidence wasn't a photograph or a bank statement. It was a recording, one in which Damian could be heard discussing his plans before Amelia ever knew what she was facing. To understand how a marriage that once looked stable ended this way, it helps to go back to the beginning, long before the accusations, the courtroom, or the folder that changed everything. 15 years earlier, Damian Blackwood was not a billionaire. He was a young entrepreneur working out of a small office with a handful of employees and an idea that felt bigger than the money behind it. Amelia met him during a period when success was still something he talked about rather than something he had. She saw the late nights, the setbacks, the meetings that went nowhere. She saw the stretches where he doubted whether the company would ever become what he imagined. And she stayed. That was something Damian would later seem to forget. Amelia had not married his future wealth. She had married the man who existed before any of it arrived. When the first significant investment came through, she celebrated with him. When the company began to grow, she supported him. When a magazine first profiled him as a promising young founder, she smiled, remembering the nights he had eaten dinner alone at his desk because there wasn't time to go home. When the valuation eventually crossed into the billions, Damian bought a large house on a private lake. Amelia moved in with him, but the house never changed how she carried herself. Her priorities stayed the same. Their son, Noah, and their daughter, Sophie, came first. Noah was old enough to understand that his family had money, though not old enough to understand where it had come from. Sophie was still at the age where school performances, bedtime stories, and knowing her mother would be there mattered more than anything else. Amelia loved the ordinary parts of an extraordinary life. Sunday mornings at the kitchen island. Noah's growing confidence. Sophie practicing dance steps in the hallway. She believed Damian loved those moments just as much as she did. For years, in interviews, Damian described Amelia as the reason he stayed grounded. At company events, he introduced her with visible pride. People saw a couple who appeared to complement each other, one bringing the ambition and the empire, the other bringing steadiness and quiet confidence. Their household looked settled. Their children were thriving. Their future seemed secure. But marriages rarely end in a single moment. Often, the first sign is something so small that it's easier to dismiss than to face directly. For Amelia, that first sign was Damian's phone. He began keeping it closer than before. He changed the passcode. He started taking calls in another room. During dinner, messages would arrive, and he would glance at the screen, smile faintly, and turn the phone face down. When Amelia asked what was funny, he told her it was work. At first, she accepted that. The company had grown enormous, and growth came with demands, travel, meetings, investor calls, obligations that pulled them away from home more than they used to. Amelia understood ambition. She had lived alongside it for 15 years, and she didn't want to become the kind of spouse who questioned every late night. Then the late nights became more frequent. Sometimes he came home after the children were already asleep. The explanations were always plausible: a meeting that ran long, a delayed flight, which was part of what made them difficult to challenge. Amelia sat with the screen in front of her for a long moment before she could move. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a single lapse in judgment. It was a relationship that had been running alongside their marriage for some time. She went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor, crying quietly so the children wouldn't hear. The next morning, Amelia placed the photographs on the table and asked Damian how long it had been going on. She expected an apology. What she got instead was anger, directed not at what he had done, but at the fact that she had found it. He accused her of going through his laptop. He told her to lower her voice. When she pressed him about Victoria, he called her irrational. Amelia told him their marriage was over. Damian looked at her and asked whether she really believed she was leaving with their children. At the time, Amelia thought it was an angry, thoughtless remark. She assumed the hardest part ahead would be the divorce itself. She was wrong, because Damian had already begun preparing for something much larger than a separation. 3 days later, she was served divorce papers. The stated grounds were infidelity, but not his. Hers. The filing accused Amelia of an affair with a man named Daniel Cross. She knew Daniel through business contacts, but there had never been anything romantic between them. Yet the paperwork included photographs, messages, hotel reservations, and financial records that appeared to support the claim. Her first reaction was confusion. Her second was fear. Her third, once she had time to sit with it, was clarity. Damian wasn't simply ending the marriage. He was building a narrative, and in that narrative, she was the one at fault. He carried that narrative into the custody proceedings, describing the alleged affair as evidence of poor judgment, questioning her stability, and positioning himself as the more dependable parent. Because temporary custody arrangements can be decided before a full case is heard, Amelia found her access to Noah and Sophie limited almost immediately. Overnight visits were suspended. Damian was granted temporary primary custody. The woman who had spent years raising those children was suddenly navigating supervised visits and legal restrictions. One afternoon, she went to the house to collect some belongings. Noah saw her and ran toward her. For a brief moment, none of the legal complexity mattered, only a mother and her son. Then Damian stepped between them, citing the court order. Noah began to cry, confused about why his mother couldn't simply come home. That day, Amelia understood that Damian wasn't only trying to end the marriage. He was trying to control how the story of its ending would be told, and to whom. Within weeks, elements of the story reached the press. Headlines framed it as a case of a wife's betrayal. People who had never met Amelia began forming opinions about her marriage, her character, and her motives. Meanwhile, Damian remained composed in every public statement, consistent, calm, and carefully worded. That composure worried Amelia more than anything else. He didn't seem anxious. He seemed prepared. It was around this time that Amelia hired an attorney named Eleanor Grant, someone who understood early on that emotion alone would not carry the case. At their first meeting, Amelia brought everything she had: the receipt, the photographs of Damian and Victoria, the divorce filing, and the allegations against her. Eleanor read through it all, and then asked Amelia a simple question. What did she want? Amelia said she wanted her children back. That answer shaped everything that followed. Rather than focusing entirely on proving Amelia's character, Eleanor began examining how Damian's case had been built, working from a simple principle. Every fabricated story requires construction, and construction leaves traces. The first inconsistency showed up in the messages submitted as evidence. Timestamps didn't align with Amelia's actual phone records. One message supposedly sent late at night from her device coincided with a documented call to her mother at that same time. Another placed her at a hotel her phone records showed she had never visited. The hotel reservation itself traced back to an account connected to Damian's corporate office. An email account attributed to Amelia had recovery information linked to someone inside his company. The financial transfers he claimed she had made led back, eventually, to entities under his own control. The photographs told a similar story. One image, meant to show an intimate dinner between Amelia and Daniel Cross, turned out to be a cropped version of a business event attended by several other people. The full picture told a very different story than the one presented in court. Each inconsistency chipped away at the narrative, but Eleanor knew inconsistencies alone might not be enough. She needed something that connected Damian directly to the effort. Then came an anonymous message, a suggestion to look into an older security system that had once operated at Blackwood International's headquarters. The company had upgraded its surveillance years earlier, but archived footage from the old system still existed in storage. Eleanor pursued this through proper legal channels, requesting the records formally rather than attempting to access them directly. After hours of reviewing routine footage of employees and visitors, they found recordings from the period when the alleged affair between Amelia and Daniel was supposed to have started. Instead, the footage showed Damian and Victoria. It showed them entering his office together, and later, arriving at and leaving a hotel together. It didn't match the story that had been presented in the filings. Then came a recording that changed the direction of the case entirely. In it, Damian could be heard discussing what might happen if Amelia refused to leave quietly, referencing the children and describing an approach designed to make it difficult for her to maintain custody. It was not a moment of anger caught on tape. It sounded deliberate, closer to a plan than a reaction. For Amelia, that recording clarified something she had been struggling to understand. Damian hadn't simply reacted emotionally to being discovered. He had prepared for the possibility in advance. Amelia had spent months asking herself why Damian was willing to go this far. The answer, it turned out, involved more than pride. Financial records connected to Blackwood International showed significant transfers moving through companies and accounts Amelia had never controlled or even known about, transfers that had taken place before he accused her of financial misconduct. It began to make sense. Damian needed Amelia discredited. He needed the public and the court focused on questions about her fidelity rather than questions about where company funds were going. Around this time, Victoria resigned from Blackwood International and stopped responding to Damian's calls and messages. Eventually, she reached out to Eleanor directly, asking to meet. Meeting Victoria wasn't easy for Amelia. This was the woman who had been inside her home while secretly involved with her husband. But Victoria had information Amelia needed. Victoria admitted the affair and confirmed that Damian had told her he intended to eventually leave Amelia. She explained that once Amelia discovered the relationship, Damian grew concerned about what a straightforward divorce might expose, including decisions he had made within the company and details of his finances. Rather than risk that exposure, he decided to reframe the situation entirely. Instead of being the husband who had been unfaithful, he would present himself as the husband who had been betrayed. Victoria said Damian believed Amelia would eventually agree to almost anything if it meant regaining access to her children. It was, in hindsight, a significant miscalculation on his part. Before leaving, Victoria handed over a small drive containing copies of emails, messages, financial documents, and recordings, material she had kept in case Damian ever tried to use her as a scapegoat. Among the files was a folder outlining what appeared to be a staged plan. First, establish the appearance of an affair. Second, restrict Amelia's access to the children. Third, use the custody dispute to add pressure during the divorce negotiations. The financial records were even more significant. Millions of dollars had moved through companies connected to Blackwood International, transfers that predated the allegations against Amelia, and that traced back to accounts and instructions linked to Damian and members of his staff. Eleanor explained to Amelia that evidence like this could shift the entire case, but she was careful to note that none of it worked automatically. Documents needed authentication. Recordings needed verification. Financial trails needed to be properly traced and explained. Everything had to be handled correctly for it to matter in court. So Amelia did something she hadn't done in the earlier months of the case. She stopped reacting to every headline and every accusation and let the process work. Months later, the final custody hearing began. Damian arrived composed, confident in a setting he assumed he could manage the way he managed boardrooms. Amelia arrived tired, having spent months away from her children, but steady. His attorney opened with the same narrative that had worked earlier: the alleged affair, the photographs, the hotel records, the financial claims. This time, Eleanor was prepared to respond point by point. Daniel Cross testified that he had never had a romantic relationship with Amelia, and the cropped photograph was placed back in its original context, showing a business gathering rather than a private dinner. The message metadata was reviewed and shown not to match Amelia's devices. The hotel reservation was traced to an account connected to Damian's office rather than to her. The financial transfers attributed to her were shown to lead back to accounts under his control. Then came the archived footage, showing Damian and Victoria together during the period in question, and the recording in which Damian discussed his intentions toward Amelia and the children. For the first time in the proceedings, his composure visibly wavered. Finally, Victoria took the stand. She confirmed the affair, confirmed that Amelia had never had a relationship with Daniel Cross, and explained in detail how the appearance of that relationship had been constructed at Damian's direction. She also testified about the financial transfers, corroborating the documents already before the court. By the end of the hearing, the credibility of Damian's original case had been significantly undermined, and questions were beginning to extend beyond the courtroom, toward his company and its investors. Outside the courtroom, the public narrative began to shift. The company that had once been described as Damian's greatest achievement started facing scrutiny from its own board and investors, unrelated to the divorce itself, but tied directly to the financial questions the case had surfaced. The court, weighing the evidence, the testimony, and the conduct of both parties throughout the dispute, ultimately granted Amelia primary custody of Noah and Sophie. The allegations that had been used to paint her as an unfit parent no longer held up. Amelia didn't leave the courthouse feeling triumphant. She felt worn down by months of a fight that should never have been necessary in the first place. But she felt something else, too: relief that it was finally over. The moment that mattered most came outside her children's school, when she saw Noah and Sophie again. Noah reached her first, running full speed, and Amelia dropped everything she was carrying to hold him. Sophie followed seconds later. For a moment, none of the months apart seemed to matter. Noah asked if she was staying. She told him yes. He asked if it was forever. She told him she hoped so. Children don't experience custody arrangements the way adults do. They understand absence, and they understand when someone they love is finally back. Amelia couldn't recover the months that had been lost, but she could be present for everything that came next. As Amelia rebuilt her life, Damian's situation continued to deteriorate. The financial scrutiny that had started with the divorce case extended into his company's operations. His standing with the board weakened. Legal and financial pressures mounted, and much of the wealth he had built began to erode under the weight of it. Amelia moved into a smaller home, without the scale or the staff of the lake house, but with something that had been missing during the final years of her marriage: a sense of calm. A kitchen where the children could be themselves. A garden Sophie could tend. a living room where nobody was tense about what might be said next. She eventually became involved in advocacy work supporting people navigating financial manipulation within relationships, work shaped directly by what she had experienced and learned throughout the process. Sometime after the divorce was finalized, Amelia ran into Damian unexpectedly while she was out with the children. He looked older, and the confidence that had once seemed constant was gone. He asked how the children were doing. Sophie asked if he would come to her birthday. He said he wasn't sure. Then he told Amelia he assumed she hated him. She told him she didn't, explaining that hatred would mean he still occupied space in her life, and he no longer did. He admitted he had been afraid of losing everything. Amelia pointed out, without anger, that he'd had the option to be honest from the start, to admit the affair and ask for a divorce directly. Instead, he had chosen to make sure that if he was going to lose something, she would lose more first. That, she said, was the real difference between them. She had lost her marriage. He had lost himself. She took her children's hands and walked away, and this time, she didn't look back. The story of Damian and Amelia Blackwood isn't really about revenge. It's about what happens when someone mistakes wealth for control. Damian believed that money and a well-managed public image could outweigh the truth. He believed his children could be used as leverage in a legal strategy. He underestimated how far Amelia would go to protect them and to protect the facts. Amelia never tried to outshout him or outspend him. She documented, she waited, and she let evidence speak for itself. Evidence that showed the affair he had committed was real. The affair he accused her of was not, and the financial trail he tried to attach to her name led back to him. That is often the pattern with fabricated stories. Each false detail requires another explanation. Each manufactured document requires someone to maintain it, and eventually the person managing the narrative becomes trapped inside it. For Amelia, the most important outcome was never Damian's downfall. It was her children coming home. And in the end, that was enough. If you were in Amelia's position, would you have tried to reconcile, or would you have walked away for good? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you'd like to see more stories like this one, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next.